The confrontation between Tom Hardy and Denise Welch began so subtly that most viewers didn't notice the shift until it was already spiraling. At the start of the interview, the atmosphere was steady and pleasant. Hardy entered with his usual understated confidence, hands in his pockets, offering a polite smile to the applauding audience. He sat down, exchanged greetings with the panel, and seemed ready to get through the segment smoothly. The panelists, apart from Denise, kept things light, asking about his preparation for the new film, his intense training routines, and his interest in complex characters. Hardy answered respectfully, even adding small bits of humor when he felt comfortable. For a brief moment, it felt like the interview would remain calm. But Denise Welch had different intentions. Known for her directness and unfiltered questioning, she seemed determined to break Hardy's controlled demeanor. At first, her questions were only slightly more pointed than the others, but gradually she edged into personal territory. She mentioned that some fans perceived him as distant or hard to interview, and asked whether he felt those criticisms were fair. The question was sharp, but Hardy handled it gracefully, saying he wasn't difficult, just private. That should have been the end of the line. But Denise, sensing an opening, pressed further. She continued by questioning whether his privacy was a burden for those trying to connect with him on air. Hardy's posture stiffened just slightly, but he remained composed. He clarified that he was present, engaged, and answering sincerely. Denise, however, wasn't satisfied. She insisted that actors owed the public a certain level of openness. A few audience members shifted in their seats, sensing that the tone was turning. Hardy's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in weary frustration. He had clearly faced this line of questioning too many times in his career, and Denise's relentless probing was wearing thin. Trying to keep the interview grounded, Hardy emphasized that he wasn't trying to withhold himself, he was simply being authentic. But Denise leaned in, challenging him with a pointed remark, "You look uncomfortable. Are you sure you're not holding back on purpose?" The panel visibly tensed. One of them even whispered a soft, "Denise," under her breath. But Denise didn't stop there. She suggested that Hardy's reluctance to open up was the reason interviews with him sometimes felt difficult. That word, difficult, seemed to hang heavy in the air. Hardy let a long silence pass before responding. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but firm. He explained that if the purpose of the interview was to talk about the film, he was happy to do that. But he was not okay with being poked and prodded about his personality as if he owed the world an emotional performance. His comment drew spontaneous applause from the audience, who recognized the unfairness of the interrogation he was facing. Hardy glanced toward the supportive faces in the crowd, nodding lightly in gratitude. But Denise pushed one more time, insisting viewers wanted to see a different side of him, maybe even a more relaxed version. This was the moment everything snapped. Hardy inhaled deeply, then stood up, not abruptly but decisively. The studio gasped. He thanked the other panelists for having him, completely bypassing Denise, and turned toward the exit. His expression wasn't angry, it was disappointed, perhaps even hurt. As he walked off, the remaining panelists scrambled to regain control, but the shock was too thick in the air. Denise sat frozen, caught off guard by the reality that her questioning had driven away one of the most respected actors in the industry. The other panelists exchanged worried glances, unsure whether to comfort her or call out the moment. The audience buzzed with murmurs until the producers hurriedly cut to a commercial break. Even then, the disbelief lingered. Tom Hardy had quietly, but powerfully, walked off the show, leaving Denise Welch stunned into silence. The moments after Tom Hardy walked off stage were chaotic behind the scenes, though the audience only glimpsed a fraction of the disruption. As soon as the commercial break began, a swarm of producers rushed toward the panel, their expressions frantic. One of the stage managers attempted to follow Hardy backstage, but he held up a hand and politely declined any attempt to coax him back. He wasn't yelling, wasn't angry, just done. His calm, controlled exit made the entire situation feel even heavier, almost as if the show itself had crossed a line it couldn't easily step back from. Back on stage, Denise Welch tried to maintain her composure. Her usual confidence seemed to slip for a moment as she stared at the spot where Hardy had been sitting just minutes earlier. Her co-hosts tried to lighten the atmosphere with awkward jokes and nervous laughter, but nothing truly softened the tension. They all knew the show had entered uncomfortable territory. Some whispered among themselves about how the viewers would react, others checked with producers for guidance, but the general mood was thick with unease. When the show returned from the break, the energy was starkly different. The panelists offered quick explanations, calling it a misunderstanding, and assuring the audience that Tom Hardy would perhaps rejoin them another time. But even their voices lacked conviction. Denise attempted to brush the moment aside with a strained smile, saying things like, "Well, sometimes interviews don't go as planned." But viewers could see through it. Her defensiveness only fueled speculation. Meanwhile, backstage, Hardy was pacing slowly, not out of anger but to clear his head. A producer timidly approached him again, offering an apology on behalf of the show. Hardy nodded respectfully, saying he appreciated the apology but preferred to leave quietly rather than return and pretend everything was fine. He didn't blame the show entirely, just the direction the interview had taken. His goal had been to discuss the film, bring insight to the character, maybe share a few behind-the-scenes stories. Instead, he felt cornered, analyzed, and reduced to a personality critique for entertainment. As Hardy prepared to leave the studio, a few crew members offered supportive glances. Some even whispered they understood why he walked off. Hardy remained gracious, he wasn't trying to cause drama. He simply valued respect and boundaries, something that had been eroded during the exchange. When his car arrived, he slipped into it quietly, disappearing from the studio grounds before the final segment of Loose Women even aired. Back on stage, Denise wrestled with rising discomfort. Though she tried to maintain her typical bold persona, she couldn't completely mask how rattled she was. The co-hosts tiptoed around the subject, unsure whether addressing it more directly would help or worsen things. The audience's reactions didn't help either. Some supporters of Hardy defended him loudly, applauding his refusal to be pushed beyond his comfort zone. Others thought he had overreacted. The studio audience sat divided, whispering among themselves, creating a persistent buzz that lingered beneath the panelists' discussions. As social media clips began circulating, some showing Hardy's calm but decisive departure, others highlighting Denise's pointed comments, the situation rapidly grew into a trending topic. Viewers debated the responsibilities of interviewers versus the boundaries of celebrities. Some criticized Denise for being overly aggressive, while others defended her as simply doing her job. Meanwhile, Hardy's quiet departure earned him both admiration for his composure and sympathy for being placed under a microscope. The final minutes of the episode limped along as the panel tried to return to lighter topics, but the earlier tension refused to fade. Denise, though outwardly composed, said noticeably less than usual, as if weighing her words carefully for the first time that afternoon. When the credits finally rolled, the panelists let out visible sighs of relief, yet the real storm was only beginning. By the time the studio lights dimmed and the audience filed out, the incident had already become larger than the show itself. Tom Hardy's departure wasn't dramatic or explosive, it was quiet, deliberate, and deeply unsettling in its understatement. And that, more than anything, was what left Denise Welch and the Loose Women team stunned long after the cameras stopped recording. In the hours after the episode ended, the studio corridors buzzed with tension, speculation, and hurried conversations that tried, and failed, to contain the fallout. Crew members huddled in small groups, replaying the confrontation in fragmented whispers. The usually lively atmosphere of the Loose Women set felt heavy, muted, as if everyone sensed they had just witnessed a moment that would follow the show long after that afternoon. Denise Welch remained in her dressing room for a long stretch of time, the door closed, the lights dimmed. She insisted she was fine, brushing off check-ins from producers, but her silence suggested the encounter had cut deeper than she wanted to admit. Inside her dressing room, Denise mulled over the exchange again and again. She replayed her questions, her tone, the sharpness of her approach. At first, she justified her line of inquiry: she'd always pushed guests, always used directness as her trademark. But the more she reflected, the more she recognized a nuance she had overlooked. Tom Hardy wasn't a typical guest who fed off banter or confrontation. He was introspective, deliberate, someone who guarded his emotional space. Denise hadn't simply asked tough questions, she had poked at vulnerabilities. And now the world had seen the outcome. Producers knocked again, this time bringing early social media reactions. Denise glanced through them quickly. Some defended her, praising her for being fearless. But many others criticized her harshly, accusing her of disrespect, insensitivity, and crossing boundaries. The dichotomy stung. She had been in television long enough to weather criticism, yet something about this particular backlash unsettled her. It wasn't just that Tom Hardy was beloved, it was that his response had been so composed, so quiet, that it cast a sharp contrast against her intensity. Meanwhile, Tom Hardy's departure had already stirred attention outside the studio. Paparazzi spotted him leaving, capturing photos of him looking contemplative rather than irritated. Entertainment outlets began crafting headlines, some exaggerating the confrontation, others focusing on the subtle power of his silent exit. Hardy didn't issue a statement, he didn't need to. His actions on air had spoken volumes. But behind the scenes, he informed his team that he bore no ill will toward the show. He simply wanted distance, and he certainly didn't want to escalate anything further. In the control room, senior producers gathered around a long table, discussing how to address the incident publicly. Some argued the show should release a formal apology, others suggested downplaying it entirely, framing it as a brief misunderstanding. The fear was clear: they didn't want the moment to overshadow the show's reputation or alienate future celebrity guests. The debate stretched long into the evening, with no consensus reached. Later that night, the network executives called Denise for a conversation. Their tone was firm but supportive. They didn't reprimand her outright, but they advised her to consider issuing a personal clarification or even an apology the following day. Denise listened quietly, responding only with short acknowledgments. She wasn't ready to decide. The encounter with Hardy had left her shaken, not because she feared public backlash but because she sensed, maybe for the first time in a long career, that she might have miscalculated her approach. As the evening wore on, clips of the interview spread across social media, sparking intense discussion. Some viewers analyzed Hardy's body language, noting the moment he began distancing himself emotionally. Others dissected Denise's tone, arguing whether her questioning was justified or unnecessarily intrusive. It became one of the most debated cultural moments of the week, with commentators from various platforms weighing in. By the next morning, both Denise and the show were trending. Loose Women issued a brief statement assuring viewers that they respected all their guests and valued open dialogue. Denise, however, remained silent, publicly, at least. She spent the morning drafting and redrafting her thoughts, unsure of how to balance professional pride with genuine introspection. Tom Hardy, miles away from the studio, enjoyed a quiet morning walk with his dog, seemingly detached from the headlines. He had already moved on. But for Loose Women, and especially for Denise Welch, the ripples of his calm departure continued to spread, forcing everyone involved to reconsider not only what had happened, but why it had unfolded the way it did.